What if the love of your life asked for something you never imagined, something that could tear your marriage apart forever? This is the story of how one night changed everything, and the impossible road to forgiveness that followed. The first time I crossed paths with Brianna was at a cozy little coffee shop just off campus. Back then, I was a sophomore, juggling my studies with a part-time barista job to keep things afloat. She entered the cafe with this effortless confidence, her laughter cutting through the background hum as she joked with a friend. It was impossible not to notice her, there was something magnetic about the way she carried herself. She ordered a chai latte, but in my distracted state, I accidentally handed her a cappuccino. It led to a brief, awkward moment where I apologized, and she smiled, saying, "I'll let it slide this time." That small encounter didn't seem like much at the time, but it turned out to be the start of something life-changing. As fate would have it, we kept running into each other at various campus events. Eventually, I worked up the nerve to ask her out. Our first date wasn't anything fancy, just burgers at a local diner followed by a quiet, late-night walk along the lake. But to me, it was perfect. Brianna, I soon learned, was majoring in criminal justice, driven by her dream to one day work in law. Her determination inspired me, and her sense of humor had me laughing so hard I could barely breathe. By the time we graduated, we were inseparable. After college, life got real fast. I landed an entry-level job at a publishing house, while Brianna started her career at a law firm. We both worked long hours and shared a tiny apartment with creaky floors and worn-out wallpaper. It wasn't glamorous by any means, but it didn't matter, we were happy. Those early years together were about building something solid, late-night takeout dinners, deep conversations about our future, and the sound of laughter filling our little place. When our first child was born, everything changed in ways we hadn't anticipated. I can still vividly recall standing by Brianna's side as she gave birth, holding her hand tightly and marveling at her incredible strength. It felt like we were stepping into an entirely new chapter of life. Brianna, ever selfless, decided to take a step back from her budding career to focus on motherhood, pouring her heart into raising our child. While I climbed the corporate ladder, Brianna and I navigated the sleepless nights, the endless diaper changes, and the chaos of parenthood as a true team. We balanced the madness with love, laughter, and unwavering support for one another. As our family grew, so did the demands on our time and energy. Eventually, we moved into a modest house, one that we gradually transformed into a home brimming with memories, birthday parties, holiday gatherings, and quiet moments that made all the hard work worthwhile. When our youngest started kindergarten, Brianna returned to work as a paralegal. She excelled in her role, quickly becoming a respected member of the legal team. Watching her thrive professionally while managing our home life with grace only deepened my admiration for her. Despite our hectic schedules, we prioritized each other, carving out time for weekly date nights and summer getaways where we could escape the noise of daily life and reconnect. Looking back now, I realize those years were shaped by countless milestones, triumphs, challenges, and compromises that pulled us closer together. We had weathered our share of storms, financial strain, career shifts, and the ups and downs of raising children. But none of those prepared me for what lay ahead, the crossroads I never saw coming. The signs had been there for weeks, maybe even months, subtle yet persistent. But I had been too blind, or perhaps too trusting, to acknowledge them. Brianna had started showering me with an unusual amount of attention. Instead of the usual quick toast and coffee in the mornings, she began preparing elaborate breakfasts. Dinners became a celebration of my favorite dishes, often accompanied by a bottle of wine. She began wearing new lingerie, showing me affection in ways that felt both surprising and welcome. Did I question the sudden change in our 24 years together? No. I welcomed it, thinking it was a refreshing spark after our youngest child had left for college. In fact, it inspired me to show her how much I appreciated her efforts. I started coming home earlier whenever I could, making sure we had more quality time together. Brianna had always been an exceptional partner, balancing work, family, and life with grace. Since returning to her job, she had earned a promotion, leading the paralegal team at the prestigious law firm Thomas, Dixon, and Harris. People often complimented us on how well we had aged together and how we seemed like a striking couple. Life felt like it had entered a calmer, more rewarding phase. Then, everything changed last Wednesday. I came home around 5 p.m., like usual, and found Brianna in the kitchen, preparing dinner. For weeks, her meals had been more elaborate, always made with care, but that evening something felt different. As I greeted her and told her I loved her, she responded with a smile, yet there was something in her voice, something subtle but off, that caught me off guard. It wasn't the casual, light-hearted tone I was used to. There was an undercurrent, a weight to her words that I couldn't quite place. I didn't know it then, but that night marked the beginning of a truth I hadn't been prepared to face. "I love you," she said, just like she did every day. I nodded, offering the same response I always did, "I love you too." Dinner came and went without anything unusual, plates cleared, leftovers stored away. I took over loading the dishwasher while Brianna headed upstairs, saying she wanted to change into something more comfortable. I assumed it was just another quiet night between us, maybe another moment of closeness like we'd had in recent weeks. I didn't sense what was coming. After finishing up, I joined her in the living room, where the lights were dim, casting a soft, relaxed glow. Brianna was reclining on the sofa, wearing a silky robe that clung to her in a way I couldn't help but notice. I was about to speak, maybe tease her a little, when her expression stopped me. There was something in her eyes, a hesitance, a weight I didn't understand. "Honey, I need to tell you something," she said, her voice quiet but serious. I furrowed my brow, confused by her tone. "Okay," I answered, trying to sound casual, though unease was already creeping in. "You know I love you, right?" Her words came out softly, as though she was testing how I might respond. "Of course," I replied, offering a reassuring smile. "And I love you too." But my heart had started to beat faster, sensing something wasn't right. She took a breath, glancing away for a moment before speaking again. "This Friday, I've made plans, to spend the night with someone from work." At first, her words didn't make sense. They hung in the air, strange and disconnected from reality. When the meaning finally clicked, I stood abruptly, disbelief hitting me like a punch. "What are you talking about?" I demanded, my voice sharp with shock. "Please, don't get angry," she said quickly, as if she'd been expecting this reaction. "I still love you, you know that. And you love me. This is just something I need to do. It'll happen once, and then it'll be over. Nothing will change between us. We can go back to how things were before, and you won't even remember this in a week." I stared at her, stunned. "Won't remember? Brianna, what are you even saying? Who is this guy? Why now, after everything we've built together? Why would you risk it all?" Her fingers fidgeted with the sash of her robe, tying and retying the knot as she avoided my gaze. "You don't need to know his name," she said quietly, as if it would somehow soften the blow. "It's not about who he is. He's a consultant who started at the firm a few months ago. We worked closely, long hours, stressful projects. Over time, we developed feelings." She paused, gathering herself before continuing. 2 months ago, he admitted he was attracted to me. He wanted to be with me. But I didn't want to do something careless, something cheap or sneaky. This isn't like that. It's different. It has to be special. I didn't want to lie to you, so I told him I couldn't do it unless you understood." She looked up at me then, her eyes pleading. "I can't explain it. I need to know what this feels like, or I'll always wonder. Please, let me do this. After that, I'll be yours, completely and forever." I felt like the floor had dropped out beneath me. My pulse pounded in my ears, and my chest tightened with a mix of rage, betrayal, and sheer disbelief. "You want my permission?" I asked, my voice low but firm, each word laced with incredulity. "You want me to stand by while you experience this, and then what? Pretend it never happened? You think I'll forget about it?" Her eyes shimmered, but she stayed calm. "I'm not trying to hurt you. This is something I need for myself, and then we can move on." "No," I said flatly, anger rising in my throat. "I'll never be okay with this. You're asking me to watch everything we've built crumble, for what? Some passing fling you think will bring you clarity? I'll never agree to this." Silence settled between us, thick and heavy. Brianna's face remained calm, but her eyes showed a flicker of something, regret, perhaps, or frustration that I wasn't reacting the way she hoped. I didn't know what else to say, only that I couldn't believe the woman I had built a life with was standing in front of me, asking for permission to tear it all apart. I replied firmly, "Bree, this will destroy us. It'll ruin our marriage." "No, it won't," she insisted, her voice steady, as if she had rehearsed this conversation. "Once it's over, I'll be the best wife you can imagine. I'll cook for you, keep the house spotless, do all the laundry and shopping. I'll be the perfect partner in every way, including the bedroom. You can have me anytime." She looked at me with pleading eyes, as if offering this was enough to mend the damage before it even happened. I didn't respond right away. Instead, I walked upstairs, grabbed a few things I'd need for the next day, including my toiletries, and moved into the guest room, which had its own attached bathroom. It wasn't about comfort, it was about distance. As I packed, Brianna followed me, trying to stop me. "Don't do this, Ty," she said, stepping into the doorway. "Nothing's going to change. I know you're upset now, but by Sunday afternoon, this will all be behind us. We'll go back to being us." I paused, turning to meet her gaze. "I'm not just upset, Bree," I said quietly, keeping my tone controlled but resolute. "If you go through with this, we'll never be us again." My words hung in the air, heavy with finality. I moved my things into the guest room, and for the first time in 25 years, I wasn't sharing a bed with my wife. My mind spiraled into dark thoughts as I tried to make sense of what was happening. Was she considering leaving me now that the kids were grown and out of the house? The possibility shattered me. What if she found their night together more exciting, more satisfying, than what we had shared for so many years? What if this wasn't just a one-time thing, but the beginning of something more? For 25 years, Brianna and I had shared a deep, familiar closeness. There weren't many surprises left in our physical relationship, but that didn't mean I didn't still desire her. Whether she wore a sleek black dress, something racy, or just one of my old t-shirts, I always found her incredibly attractive. Yet now, the intimacy we'd built over decades felt fragile, threatened by the unknown. The next morning, I left the house earlier than usual, skipping our customary goodbye kiss. I knew she noticed the shift in my behavior, but I didn't look back. I needed space, clarity, something I couldn't find under the same roof where this nightmare had begun. Later that morning, I drove downtown to the offices of Thomas, Dixon, and Harris, Brianna's law firm. Their office occupied the top floor of a sleek, modern skyscraper. The reception area was just as polished and impressive as I remembered from past events, an open, airy layout with plush seating, a fully stocked bar, and walls adorned with tasteful artwork. Everything about the place screamed success. Seated at the central reception desk was Emily Stratton, the firm's office manager. She recognized me immediately, offering a warm smile. "Good morning, Ty. It's been a while." "Hi, Emily," I said, forcing a polite nod, though my mind was elsewhere. I couldn't help but wonder if she knew, if anyone here knew, about the man Brianna was planning to spend the night with. Did they suspect something was going on? Or was it a well-kept secret, hidden behind the polished professionalism of these walls? Before I could gather my thoughts, Emily's phone rang, and after a brief conversation, she looked up and said, "Mr. Hayes is heading out for lunch with some clients. If you're here to see him, you might want to catch him before he leaves. I wasn't here for Mr. Hayes. I wasn't even sure why I had come. Maybe I thought seeing this place, being where Brianna worked, where this whole thing started, would give me some kind of clarity. Instead, it only deepened the unease sitting heavy in my chest. I thanked Emily and left, walking back to my car with my mind still spinning. I had no plan, no clear next step. All I knew was that something had broken between us, and I wasn't sure if it could ever be fixed. "I'll make sure he has a moment to talk with you," Emily said warmly. I thanked her and took a seat in the sleek waiting area, trying to steady my nerves. A few minutes later, she returned with a cup of coffee. "I added a splash of Bailey's," she said with a playful wink. "You look like you need it." Her small gesture brought a faint smile to my face, though it didn't erase the knot in my stomach. I appreciated the kindness, but my mind was still spinning with thoughts of the difficult conversation ahead. I could only hope that William Thomas, the senior partner at the firm, might offer some insight, maybe even a way to stop Brianna before it was too late. A few moments later, Mr. Thomas appeared, his presence as commanding as ever. He extended a hand, and I rose to meet him. "Ty, it's been a while. How are you holding up?" he asked, his tone genuinely concerned. "I'm doing okay," I replied, though my voice lacked conviction. The truth was, I wasn't okay, not even close. "Well, if Emily thinks it's important, it must be," he said, gesturing for me to follow him into his office. "What's on your mind?" Standing there, just inside his spacious, glass-walled office, I hesitated. The weight of what I was about to say felt crushing. It wasn't easy to admit that my marriage, the life I had spent decades building, was unraveling. But I forced myself to start. "I hate to bring this up, Mr. Thomas. Honestly, it's embarrassing," I began, my voice low, barely above a whisper. "What's going on, Ty?" he asked, his expression a mix of curiosity and genuine concern. I took a deep breath, the words catching in my throat. "It's about my wife, Brianna. She works here. She told me that she plans to spend Saturday night with one of your associates." I paused, struggling to maintain my composure. "I'm sorry to have brought this to you. I know it's a personal matter, but I didn't know where else to turn." Mr. Thomas's expression didn't change, but I could see the concern in his eyes. He nodded slowly, taking in what I had just told him. "I'm really sorry to hear that, Ty. This must be incredibly difficult for you." "It is," I admitted, my voice faltering. "But I shouldn't have come. I need to figure out how to deal with it on my own." "Good luck, Ty," he said sincerely as I turned to leave. I stepped back into the reception area, where Emily was waiting with a curious look. "How did it go?" she asked softly. "It was a mistake to bring this to him," I admitted, feeling a wave of regret. "I feel foolish." Emily gave me a kind, understanding smile. "You're being too hard on yourself," she said gently. "Sit down and take a moment. I'll bring you another coffee, or something stronger, if you'd prefer." I nodded and sank into one of the plush chairs, exhausted from the emotional weight of it all. The silence stretched between us for a few moments, broken only by the occasional murmur of voices from nearby offices. Then, unexpectedly, Emily spoke again, her tone thoughtful. "Did you know my late husband was a fighter pilot?" she asked, her voice soft but clear. I looked up, surprised by the shift in conversation. "I knew you were widowed," I said, my curiosity piqued. "But I didn't know he was a pilot." Emily smiled faintly, a distant look in her eyes. "He was brave, strong, and incredibly stubborn," she said with a hint of fondness. "We faced a lot together, separation, fear, uncertainty. But what I learned from him is that no matter how tough things get, you can't give up on the people you love. You fight for them, Ty, even when it feels impossible." Her words hung in the air, offering a strange comfort I hadn't expected. Maybe she was right. Maybe it wasn't too late to fight for Brianna, for the life we had built together. I replied quietly, I didn't know he was a pilot. Emily's expression softened, her eyes distant as she reminisced. Joe was my hero. We married right after he graduated from the Air Force Academy. He flew a TENS, the Warthog, as they call it. He served 2 tours in the Middle East before. Her voice faltered briefly before she regained her composure. Before he was tragically killed in a training accident. I listened closely as she recounted his years of service, including the honors he had received. There was something in her tone, a mixture of pride and lingering grief, that made me pause. Despite everything she had endured, she remained composed and gracious. Her words stayed with me long after we parted ways. Later that evening, feeling drained and in desperate need of a distraction, I stopped by the Iris Club, a cozy bar where I could unwind with a few drinks. The familiar faces of friends and the soft hum of conversation offered a temporary escape from the turmoil brewing in my life. For a few hours, I let myself relax, pushing thoughts of Brianna and her plans out of my mind. By the time I returned home, it was almost 10 p.m. Brianna was waiting for me in the kitchen, her frustration palpable the moment I stepped through the door. "You didn't even bother to call," she said sharply, her tone laced with irritation. "I went out of my way to make a nice dinner for us. It's sitting in the fridge. I was hoping we could spend some time together tonight, maybe even." She trailed off, clearly annoyed. I leaned against the counter, watching her intently. "Bree, don't do this," I said quietly but firmly. "It won't end the way you think it will." She paused for a moment, as though considering my words, but said nothing. Instead, she turned and walked away, disappearing through the door and leaving me alone once again in the silence of the house. When Brianna returned later the next afternoon, it was impossible not to notice that she had gone all out. Her hair was pinned up in an elegant style, her nails painted a bold, striking red. She looked radiant, too radiant, like someone preparing for something special. It was clear what that something was. "Ty, it's not going to work," she said casually, a hint of defiance in her voice. "You know I already have plans tonight." "I know what your plans are," I replied evenly, keeping my voice steady. "But sometimes plans change. Sometimes, something better comes along. Are you really going to disappoint me for him?" My words hung in the air, the tension between us palpable. Brianna sighed, shaking her head as though frustrated by my persistence. "Ty, don't do this to yourself," she said softly, her tone a strange mixture of concern and dismissal. Ignoring her words, I stepped toward the kitchen, where I had already begun preparing dinner. Without waiting for a response, I gestured toward the counter. "Let me walk you through what I've prepared for tonight." It wasn't about the food, it was about holding on, about fighting for something that I wasn't ready to give up. I began, "We'll start with a chilled green gazpacho, garnished with chopped yellow tomatoes and a drizzle of olive oil." My voice was steady, but my focus wasn't on the meal, I was trying to keep the moment grounded, to hold on to something familiar before everything spiraled beyond control. Brianna moved around the kitchen, and when she returned, she had changed into an outfit that left no doubt about her intentions. The dress she wore was elegant yet provocative, a deep neckline that drew attention to her décolletage, and a hemline that stopped modestly above her knees, though a daring slit climbed high along the side, offering teasing glimpses of her stocking tops as she moved. Her heels, adorned with delicate diamond-studded straps, added a finishing touch of sophistication. She spun slightly, as if to show off her ensemble. "How do I look?" she asked, her tone light, almost playful. Anger simmered just beneath my calm exterior, but I forced myself to smile, though it was tight and strained. "You look incredible," I said flatly. "Like you're dressed to impress." Brianna caught the edge in my voice, but she didn't acknowledge it. She turned away, busying herself with last-minute touches, clearly ready to leave. I stepped closer, placing a hand gently on her arm and reaching for the strap of her dress, easing it off her shoulder as I leaned in, pressing a kiss to her neck. She froze for a moment before pulling back abruptly. "No, Ty. Don't." Her voice was firm, yet there was an uneasiness beneath it. "You know I'm leaving tonight. We can do this another time." I held her gaze, my voice low and steady. "It's not too late to change your mind." Her expression hardened, her eyes narrowing as if she were bracing herself. "I'm not changing my plans, Ty. I told you, I'm going on this date, and I don't want you to ruin it." I exhaled slowly, stepping back, the tension in the room thick enough to cut through. "All right," I said quietly, my tone resigned. "I won't interfere anymore. You've made your choice, and I see that." Before either of us could say anything more, the doorbell rang, startling both of us. We turned toward the sound, surprised. Through the frosted glass, a figure stood silhouetted on the porch. Brianna muttered, "Who could that be at this hour?" as she moved toward the door. When she opened it, her voice caught in a mix of surprise and confusion. "Emily. What are you doing here?" I stepped forward, taking Emily's hand and gently guiding her inside. Bree's eyes darted over Emily's outfit, a striking scarlet cocktail dress that clung to her curves in a way that left no room for misinterpretation. It was a far cry from the usual conservative work attire I had seen her in before. The intent behind Emily's appearance was clear, and Brianna's expression shifted as she began to process what was happening. Emily offered a cool, composed smile, her presence calm but deliberate. Brianna's gaze lingered, uncertain and tense. "You didn't have to do this," she whispered, her voice barely above a murmur. "It was supposed to be harmless, just a little flirting. Then I got caught up in it. I thought it would be just one night." I didn't look away, my voice steady as I replied, "Harmless? You changed for him. The shorter skirts, the plunging necklines, more makeup, and his favorite perfume. Honestly, Bree, you were an open book." Brianna dropped her eyes to the floor, her fingers fidgeting nervously. "I didn't mean for it to go this far," she whispered. I don't know what happened." She trailed off, the weight of her actions pressing down on her. Emily's gaze didn't waver. "It never starts with meaning to go this far," she said quietly, her tone pointed but not unkind. "But it always does." I stepped forward, draping Brianna's shawl over her shoulders and guiding her toward the door. "One night, huh? Fine. Go, but don't come back until tomorrow morning," I said quietly, my voice carrying a mix of anger and hurt. "I've given you every chance." She didn't respond, just gave me a long look before stepping outside, the door closing behind her with an air of finality. The silence that followed was deafening. I needed something to clear my head, to drown out the whirlwind of emotions swirling inside me. I made my way to the kitchen, where I found 3 open bottles of wine, a crisp Chardonnay, a bold Cabernet, and a sweeter dessert option. Just as I began pouring myself a glass, I heard footsteps behind me. Emily had followed me into the kitchen. Without missing a beat, I pointed to the wine bottles and asked, "Which one would you like?" She smiled and chose the Chardonnay. After pouring her a glass and tasting mine, I playfully slipped an apron over her head and tied it snugly around her waist. Standing behind her, I leaned in and gave her a quick kiss on the cheek, which made her laugh. "What's my assignment, chef?" she asked, clearly enjoying the playful mood I was trying to set. "I've already baked half a pound of bacon," I said, grinning. "I need you to cut 5 strips into 1-inch pieces and mix them into the salad." A flicker of confidence returned to Emily's eyes as she grabbed the knife. "Thanks. Have you ever been a cheerleader? You sure know how to inspire someone," she teased with a laugh. A short while later, she proudly announced, "The salad's done," and carried the bowl into the dining room. I followed behind her, pulling out her chair and helping her sit before taking my own seat at the head of the table. Before we started, I refilled our glasses and raised mine. "To an unforgettable night," Emily said, her eyes sparkling in the candlelight. "I'll drink to that," I replied, clinking my glass against hers. Dinner unfolded beautifully. Each course was served with care, every bite accompanied by easy laughter and conversation. The tension that had weighed on me earlier began to ease, replaced by something softer, something real. As the evening wound down, the music slowed, and so did we. Eventually, we found ourselves standing in the middle of the room, holding each other. Her arms rested around my neck, mine gently encircled her waist. Her breath was warm against my skin as her fingers softly trailed through the hair at the back of my neck. I could feel the warmth of her body pressed against mine, every curve, every subtle movement. She must have felt my reaction too because she didn't pull away. Instead, she tilted her head slightly, inviting me closer. I leaned down, brushing my lips against her neck and collarbone, savoring her soft sighs as the moment deepened. Just as things began to intensify, Emily gently stepped back, her eyes meeting mine with a knowing smile. "Give me a few minutes to change," she said softly before disappearing down the hall. A short while later, she returned, slipping off her robe to reveal smooth, glowing skin and a delicate silk negligee that clung to her in all the right places. She was breathtaking, an image that seemed almost unreal in the dim light. Time seemed to stand still as I took in the sight of her, every doubt and hesitation melting away in that single moment. I let the robe slide down Emily's arms until it pooled silently on the floor, leaving her standing there in just the delicate negligee that clung to her body in a way that made my breath catch. Unable to resist her allure, I kissed her again, deeper this time, losing myself in the moment. My lips moved slowly, trailing a path down her neck and shoulders, savoring the warmth of her skin beneath my touch. As my kisses moved lower, I traced a slow line down her body, pausing briefly at her navel before continuing to her thighs. She began to writhe beneath me, her breathing quick and shallow, her hands gripping me tightly. "I love you, Ty," she whispered breathlessly, her voice trembling with emotion. For a moment, nothing else existed, just us, caught in a perfect, fleeting moment. By the time I returned home around noon the next day, Brianna's car was already parked in the garage. I entered through the side door, walking through the kitchen where I noticed a fresh pot of coffee on the stove. Pouring myself a cup, I took a moment to steady my thoughts before heading to the dining room. There she was, Bri, seated at the table, her hands wrapped around a cup of coffee. Her posture was stiff, her expression stern, though she didn't say a word as I approached. In contrast, I felt strangely calm, perhaps even a bit smug. A faint, almost imperceptible smile tugged at the corners of my mouth. The air between us was heavy, and it was clear that neither of us could avoid the inevitable conversation any longer. So, I began, breaking the silence. "I assume you're ready to address the elephant in the room?" Brianna didn't meet my eyes right away. She took a slow sip of her coffee before speaking, her voice quieter than usual. "Ty. I need to tell you what happened." She hesitated, clearly gathering her thoughts. "We went upstairs, and he kissed me. But something felt wrong. I didn't feel anything, no excitement, no connection." Her hands trembled slightly as she placed the cup down. "I let him undress me, but even then, I felt nothing. He noticed. When it was over, he looked at me with disappointment and said, 'That was the worst experience of my life.'" She paused, her eyes brimming with shame and regret. I don't know what I was thinking. It wasn't what I expected, it wasn't what I wanted. All I could think about was how much I had hurt you. Ty, I know I betrayed you. I humiliated you. I tried to turn you into a fool. And now I just want a chance to make things right. I'll do whatever it takes to prove to you that I can be the wife you deserve. Please, give me a year. 1 year to show you that I can be everything you need. I leaned back in my chair, crossing my arms. My voice was firm, my expression unreadable. Not so fast, Bree. You spent months building an emotional relationship with him, and weeks planning this night together. Now that it's blown up in your face, you want me to forget it all and pretend like nothing happened. That's not how this works. Her eyes filled with tears, but I pressed on. I'm not even sure I want to stay married to you. You betrayed my trust. You humiliated me. And now, you expect me to forgive and forget, just like that? I know, she whispered, her voice breaking. I know I don't deserve it, but losing you entirely, that would destroy me. I'll agree to whatever conditions you set. I'll spend this entire year proving myself to you. By the end of it, I'll make sure you never want to leave me. I studied her for a long moment, trying to gauge whether her plea came from genuine remorse or simple desperation. Finally, I nodded slowly. Then it settled, I said simply, my tone devoid of warmth. You have 1 year. The rest of the day passed without incident. I spent the afternoon working in the yard, running errands, and keeping myself busy, anything to avoid dwelling on the emotional mess we were in. Later, as I was heading out, I offered her an olive branch of sorts. If you clean up the mess from last night and straighten things up, I'll take you to lunch. Brianna nodded eagerly, grateful for the sliver of normalcy. True to my word, I took her to one of her favorite nearby restaurants. Over a couple of glasses of wine and a light salad, I finally asked the question that had been weighing on my mind. Tell me the truth, did you ever plan to leave me for him? She laughed softly, shaking her head. Absolutely not, Ty. He and I were a one-time thing. We're friends now, but nothing more. If anything, I think he's still upset about how hurt he was by your actions. Brianna hesitated, as though there was more she wanted to say, before continuing. He wasn't what I wanted. He wasn't you. And I know I've made a terrible mistake. I just hope you'll give me a chance to fix it. Brianna looked down, her hands tightly clasped in her lap as she began speaking, her voice trembling slightly. I told him how ashamed I am of what I did to you, to our marriage, she admitted. I couldn't hide from it anymore. I needed to face it head on, and I wanted you to know that I regret everything. She paused, taking a deep breath before continuing, I know words aren't enough, but I want you to understand how deeply sorry I am. Her sincerity hung in the air, but the wounds she had caused were still fresh. I didn't respond right away, letting the silence stretch as I tried to process her words. Later that day, I found myself walking into Thomas, Dixon, and Harris once again, this time with a clearer purpose. As I approached the reception desk, Emily greeted me with a warm smile. Mr. Thomas is expecting you, she said. There's something he wants to discuss with you. I don't know all the details, but it's better if you hear it directly from him. She buzzed Mr. Thomas, then gestured for me to follow her down the hallway. Reaching his office, she opened the large, intricately carved wooden door and gave me a quick, encouraging smile before stepping out and closing the door behind me. Ty. Mr. Thomas greeted warmly, standing from behind his desk and extending his hand. Good to see you again. Please, have a seat. I took the chair opposite him as he leaned forward, clasping his hands together on the polished desk. I wanted to check in with you, he began, his tone friendly and familiar. Last time we spoke, you seemed to be going through a lot. How are things now? Not wanting to delve too deeply into the messy current state of my marriage, I kept my response simple. Things are improving, I said with a small nod. I'm optimistic that we'll be all right in the long run. Mr. Thomas smiled warmly, leaning back in his chair. I'm glad to hear that, he said sincerely. Now, there's a second reason I asked to meet with you today. It concerns a letter I recently sent to Hughes, Juve, and Lewis, the firm where Stanley Wilbur is employed. Hearing Stanley's name made my jaw tighten, but I remained quiet as he continued. Despite everything that happened, Stanley did provide excellent assistance with a particularly complex case we handled. However, He paused for emphasis, his expression growing serious. His behavior caused significant turmoil in the personal life of one of our key employees, Brianna. It strained her marriage to the point where its future is now uncertain. He gave me a knowing look, as if acknowledging that he understood more about my situation than he was letting on. Lawyers already contend with a less-than-stellar reputation in the public eye. We're often seen as valuing profit over ethics, or winning over justice. In this profession, integrity is paramount. Stanley's actions raise concerns about his personal honesty, which could very well extend to his professional behavior. He leaned forward slightly, his tone firm. With this in mind, I've urged Hughes, Juve, and Lewis to closely monitor the work Stanley performs moving forward. It's important for us to maintain trust, both within our firm and with the clients we serve. I sat back in my chair, absorbing his words. It wasn't the resolution I had expected, but it felt like a small measure of justice, an acknowledgement that what Stanley had done wasn't without consequences. "Thank you," I said quietly. "I appreciate you stepping in. It means a lot." Mr. Thomas gave me a reassuring nod. "You've been through a lot, Ty. I respect the way you've handled it. If there's anything else I can do, don't hesitate to reach out." As I stepped back into the reception area, Emily was waiting for me, her expression soft and supportive. "How did it go?" she asked gently. "It went better than I expected," I admitted, feeling a bit of the tension ease from my shoulders. "Things are starting to come together. I can't thank you enough for being there for me through all of this." Emily's smile grew warmer as she stepped forward and pulled me into a tight hug. "Don't forget, Ty," she said softly. "I've grown from this too. I really did love you while we were together." "And I loved you too," I replied, my voice steady but filled with emotion. For a moment, we stayed like that, two people who had once shared something special, now standing on the other side of it, changed but stronger. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't easy. But it felt like the beginning of something new. Something I could build on. And for the first time in a while, I felt hopeful.